It was the kind of silence that presses against your skin, the kind that makes you realize how alone you really are. Elena hadn't been sleeping much lately, not since she'd moved into the small apartment at the edge of the city. The clock on the wall glowed 2:57 a.m., a quiet reminder that night was still winning. Rain whispered against the window. The streetlight outside flickered every few seconds, casting nervous shadows across her walls. She sat at her kitchen table, wrapped in a thin blanket, sipping the kind of coffee that had long gone cold. Her phone lay face down, silent, empty, just like it had been for months. And then, a knock. Soft, 3 times, measured, like someone who already knew she was awake. Her body froze. No one should have been here. Not at this hour. Not after everything she'd done to disappear. She held her breath, waiting, hoping it was just the rain playing tricks again. But then it came again, firmer this time. A low, deliberate sound that sank straight into her spine. A voice in her memory whispered, "If he ever comes back." It won't be to talk. Her fingers trembled as she set the coffee mug down. She moved slowly toward the door, every creak of the floorboard loud enough to feel criminal. The world outside her small apartment felt impossibly large, dangerous, waiting. She looked through the peephole, and her breath caught. The hallway light barely reached him. But she'd know that silhouette anywhere. Tall. Still. A dark coat draped over broad shoulders. Head slightly bowed, as if the night itself bowed with him. Lorenzo De Luca. The man she swore she'd never see again. The man who taught her how to love and how to run. Her heartbeat climbed until she could feel it behind her eyes. For a moment she thought about pretending she wasn't home. But even in the silence, she knew. He already knew she was here. His head lifted. His eyes met the peephole. And somehow, she felt seen. Exposed. He didn't need to speak. The years between them vanished in a single glance. Her mind raced back to the last time she saw him. Standing in that marble hallway, blood on his hands and heartbreak in his eyes. His voice had been low, shaking when he said, "If you walk away now, don't expect me to forget." She thought time would bury that promise. She thought he would bury her memory, too. She was wrong. Now here he was. At 3 a.m, outside her door, a knock echoed again, softer this time, almost patient. Then his voice, deep, controlled, familiar. "Elena, open the door." Her breath broke on his name. The sound of it after all these months was like a blade wrapped in velvet. Smooth, dangerous, intimate. She wanted to run. She wanted to open the door. She wanted to do both at once, but she stayed still, because she knew what came with him. The past, the danger, the kind of love that left scars. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered to no one. On the other side, silence, and then the sound of his hand against the door. A quiet press, not a knock, as if he was feeling the distance between them, as if he remembered every inch of her heartbeat. Elena's vision blurred. She closed her eyes, pressing her palm against the wood where his hand might be. For a moment the world held still, her pulse sinking with his silence. The rain outside softening into mist, time slowing just enough for memory to breathe, and then she heard it, his breath. Close. So close it was like he was whispering through the door. "I waited long enough." Her throat tightened. Something inside her broke open. Fear, longing, the ache of every goodbye that never felt finished. Because when the past comes knocking at 3 a.m, you already know the answer. You're not safe. And it's not over. There's a sound a door makes when it hesitates. When it doesn't want to open, but knows it has to. That's how it felt tonight. Elena's fingers rested on the handle for what felt like forever. The metal was cold, like it remembered him too. On the other side, she could still sense his presence. Steady, patient, impossible to ignore. The rain had softened into a drizzle. But inside, her pulse was louder than any storm. When she finally turned the lock, the click seemed to echo across every bad decision she had ever made. The door creaked open just enough for the past to slip through. And there he was, Lorenzo De Luca, no longer just a memory or a nightmare. Standing under the dim hallway light, his hair slightly damp, his eyes a dark ocean she once drowned in willingly. He looked older, or maybe just quieter, but the power was still there. That heavy silence that made the air bend around him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was strange how words felt too small for everything between them. The things they'd said, the things they'd never dared to say. She noticed his hands first. Not the scars, not the rings, but the way they stayed at his sides, like he was fighting the urge to reach for her. And maybe he was. Her voice broke the quiet, soft but steady. She didn't ask why he was here. Only one word came out. How? He didn't answer. Not with words, anyway. His gaze moved over her slowly. Her face, her trembling hands, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. The kind of look that carried memories too heavy to name. Then finally his voice. Lower, slower, like he'd been rehearsing this moment for months. You think I could forget you? The words landed like thunder disguised as a whisper. She wanted to close the door again, to stop whatever was starting to breathe between them. But her body wouldn't move. Every part of her still remembered him. The danger, the warmth, the way his presence filled every empty space inside her. He took one step forward, just enough for the light to touch the side of his face. There was something different in his eyes. Not rage, not control, just something quieter. Regret, maybe, or exhaustion, the kind that comes from missing someone too long. You shouldn't have found me, she said, barely audible. You made it too easy, he replied. There was no arrogance in his tone, just truth, because she had left clues, whether she meant to or not. The coffee shop under her fake name, the same book she always read, the same way she avoided looking at black cars on the street. She thought she had built a new life. But he'd built a map from her old one. The silence returned, heavy and unfinished. She stepped aside, slowly, and for a second she hated herself for it. Because she knew what letting him in would mean. Nothing good ever came from the word again. But still. The door opened wider, and he walked inside. He didn't touch her. Didn't speak. He just looked around the small apartment, the worn furniture, the scattered sketches on the table, the way the lamp flickered against her nervous breathing. He didn't belong here. He looked like he carried a world that could swallow this one whole. Finally, he turned to her. You live like you're hiding from ghosts. Maybe I am. Then you should have known I'd be the first one to find you. His voice softened on the last line, and something inside her cracked again. Because even now, standing in front of the man she swore to forget, her heart betrayed her. It still knew the rhythm of his voice better than its own. He reached out, slowly, carefully, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand hovered there for a second longer than it should have. It was the smallest touch, but it carried everything, memory, regret, the weight of what they never stopped being. And in that quiet, the world outside disappeared. It was just them, the storm, the silence, and everything left unsaid. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't a man with power. It's the one who remembers you when he shouldn't. There are silences that heal, and silences that warn you not to breathe too loud. This one was the second kind. Lorenzo sat at her kitchen table, the same one she'd been haunting alone for months. His coat dripped rain onto the floor, every drop landing like a heartbeat she couldn't control. He hadn't said much since he walked in. He didn't need to. His presence spoke for him, steady, unreadable, impossible to ignore. Elena kept her distance, leaning against the counter, arms crossed as if that could protect her from the past standing 10 feet away. She'd imagined this moment 100 times. The confrontation, the apology, the closure she never got. But now that it was real, it didn't feel like any of those things. It felt like a storm pretending to be calm. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough around the edges. You changed your name, she almost laughed. You make it sound like a crime. It was, he said quietly. To me. He looked up then, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes. Not anger, not control, but a kind of loneliness that didn't belong to a man like him. It was strange seeing it there, like finding a scar you didn't know he had. She turned away, pretending to fix her sleeve. You shouldn't be here, Lorenzo. I meant what I said that night. So did I. His words landed between them like broken glass. She remembered every detail of that last night. The shouting, the blood, the way he'd looked at her right before she walked out. The look of a man who'd already lost too much to let go quietly. He reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table. A small, worn envelope, her handwriting across it. Her breath caught. You kept that? You left it on my desk. I read it once, he said, then burned the copy. Couldn't burn the memory. There was a pause. The kind that makes you wish the world would stop spinning for just a second so you can catch up to the pain. Why now? She asked softly. After all this time? He leaned back, exhaled like he was trying to steady himself. Because people are dying, and your names come up again. The words froze the air between them. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stared at him, the man who used to promise her safety, now delivering danger right back to her doorstep. "You're lying," she said, shaking her head. "I wish I was." He stood up slowly, walked toward her, and for every step he took, her heartbeat grew louder. He stopped just close enough for her to feel his warmth, but not close enough to call it comfort. "You think I came here because I missed you?" He said. "I did, but that's not why I'm here." "Then why?" His eyes flickered, a shadow passing through them. "Because someone wants what you know, and they'll come for you if I don't." Elena felt the ground shift under her feet. She wanted to believe this was another one of his manipulations, that he was pulling her back into his world the way he always did. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. He wasn't here to control her. He was here to protect her, and that realization scared her more than any threat could. He reached out again, tracing the faint scar on her wrist with his thumb, a scar that only he knew the story behind. "You shouldn't have stayed in this city," he whispered. "You should have known they'd find you." She pulled her hand back, her voice trembling but strong. "Maybe I stopped running because I was tired of being afraid." He smiled, a sad, fleeting curve of his lips. "Then I guess it's my turn to be afraid for you." The clock on the wall ticked past 3:45 a.m. Outside, the rain started again, soft and relentless. Inside, the past and the present finally stood face to face, because the truth was this: she thought he came back for love. But he came back for something darker, something that would change everything she thought she knew about him. And about herself. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive like thunder. It whispers, soft, slow. And by the time you realize it's there, it's already too late to run. That's how it felt that night. Lorenzo's words still hung in the air, heavy, unfinished, dangerous. Someone wanted what she knew. Someone was coming, and somehow she was part of a story she thought she'd already escaped. Elena stood still, trying to breathe through the weight pressing on her chest. The kitchen light flickered, and for a brief second, his face looked older, not from time, but from everything he'd carried in silence. There were lines near his eyes now, shadows where there used to be fire. He looked like a man who'd seen too much, lost too much, and still hadn't learned how to let go. He poured himself a glass of water, though he didn't drink it. His hand trembled slightly. She caught it, that small, unguarded movement. And it scared her more than any threat outside the door. He wasn't here as the untouchable mafia boss anymore. He was here as the man behind it, the one who used to whisper promises against her skin and say he'd never let the world touch her. The one who failed. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost steady. "They call him Vitali now. You remember that name?" She froze. The name tasted like rust and fear. "I thought he was dead." "So did I," Lorenzo said. "But men like him don't die easy. They just disappear until they want to be found." Elena's throat went dry. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "What does he want with me?" "Not you," Lorenzo said softly. "What you have," she frowned. "I don't have anything." He watched her in silence, like a man trying to decide how much of the truth the heart can take before it breaks. Then finally, the sketch. Elena's breath caught. The sketch, the one she'd drawn months before she left him. A coded map, disguised as art. A secret that wasn't supposed to matter anymore. She thought it was gone. Lost in the ashes of everything they'd burned to stay alive. But Lorenzo's eyes told her the truth. It wasn't gone. It was still out there, and Vitali wanted it. "You were never supposed to see it again," she whispered. "Neither was he," Lorenzo said. But he did. The room felt smaller now. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the window like an impatient clock. Every second felt sharper, every silence louder. "How much time do we have?" she asked. He looked at her, the way he used to, like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "Not enough." The honesty in his voice broke something inside her. Because for all the lies he'd told, this one moment was real. He was afraid. And he was here, which meant things were worse than she could imagine. She moved closer, just enough to see her reflection in his eyes. The fear, the exhaustion, the pieces of love that never really died. "So what do we do?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her hand resting on the table, the same hand that once wore his ring. Then, quietly, "We leave before sunrise." Elena felt her heart lurch. She wanted to say no, She wanted to believe she could stay here, keep her quiet life, her safety, her solitude. But deep down, she knew the truth. Peace was a luxury she'd borrowed, not earned. She nodded slowly. "And if I don't go?" Lorenzo met her gaze, steady, unreadable, but soft in a way that still made her ache. "Then they'll find you, and I won't be able to stop it this time." The clock ticked to 4 a.m. The city outside was still asleep, unaware of the danger breathing through a single apartment window. Inside, 2 people stood facing each other. Not lovers anymore, not enemies, just 2 ghosts caught between what was lost and what was coming. And as the rain whispered against the glass, Elena realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't the end of the past. It was its return. The sky was still dark when the decision settled between them. Not spoken, not agreed upon, just understood. They would leave before sunrise, and whatever came after that, they would face it together. Elena moved quietly through the apartment, her movements slow and careful, as if every sound might wake the ghosts sleeping in the walls. The world outside hadn't started turning yet. The rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered, wet, reflective, empty. She gathered what little she owned, a few clothes, a sketchbook, a single photograph she had once sworn to throw away but never could. It was the 2 of them before everything changed. She didn't look at it for long. Some memories hurt more in the dark. Lorenzo stood by the window, watching the city breathe. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them had learned to say everything words never could. His reflection in the glass looked distant. A man caught between guilt and love, both of which refused to let go. There was something heavy about that hour before dawn. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the waiting. The way time seemed to hold its breath before deciding who would survive the morning. Elena could feel it. That pull between the life she built and the life that never stopped chasing her. Every time she looked at the door, she wondered if leaving meant freedom or surrender. She thought about the first time she met him, in a place that smelled of danger and charm, where his eyes had been sharp but his smile had been soft. She remembered the way he used to say her name, like it meant something sacred. And then she remembered the night she walked away, blood on his hands, tears on her own. It was strange how love and fear could live in the same heartbeat. Now, watching him in the faint glow of the city lights, she realized something she hadn't before. He wasn't just a man who broke her heart. He was the reason it still beat at all. He turned slightly, his gaze finding hers, and in that wordless exchange, the truth settled like dust. Whatever danger was waiting, it wasn't the first one they had faced. It might not even be the worst, but it would be the last time she faced it alone. The clock on the wall whispered 4:30. The first thin line of light had begun to bleed across the horizon, pale and uncertain. Morning was coming, but it didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like the edge of something. The thin, quiet moment before the world demands a choice. Elena tightened her grip on the handle of her small bag. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. From knowing that every step away from this apartment was a step toward the past she never wanted back, and the man she could never truly leave behind. He moved toward her, slow and measured, like he was afraid she might disappear if he got too close. There was something almost fragile in his silence, like he was holding back 100 things he would never say, and maybe that was for the best. Some truths didn't need to be spoken to be understood. The air felt colder as the night began to fade. The city stretched awake, the sound of a single car on the street, a bird breaking the silence, the soft hum of light returning to the world. Before sunrise, everything feels possible. Before sunrise, nothing has gone wrong yet. Elena looked one last time at the place she had tried to call home. The cracked mug on the table, the half-drawn curtains, the little piece of peace she built from the ruins of a life she once ran from. It was strange how leaving could feel both like losing and surviving at once. She whispered a quiet goodbye to no one in particular, turned the lock one final time, and stepped into the dawn. And behind her, the door closed, soft, final, absolute. Sometimes endings don't wait for daylight. Sometimes they happen quietly, before the sun ever knows you were there. The city looked different before sunrise, quiet, half asleep, unaware that 2 ghosts were slipping through its veins. Lorenzo drove without music, without headlights at first, letting the darkness hide them for a little while longer. The hum of the engine filled the silence between them, steady, low, almost comforting. Elena sat beside him, watching the streets blur past, The neon signs, the shuttered shops, the puddles reflecting pieces of broken light, everything she'd once known, fading behind them one turn at a time. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words stayed tangled somewhere between fear and nostalgia. Finally, he broke the silence. His voice was softer now, not the kind she remembered from the nights he gave orders. This one carried weariness instead of command. "You still hate long drives?" She looked out the window, a faint smile flickering across her lips, "Only when I don't know where they end." He nodded slowly, his eyes on the empty road. "You trust me enough to keep driving?" "Trust," she said quietly, "isn't the same as forgetting." He didn't argue. He just drove, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror like a memory that refused to let go. They crossed the bridge that marked the city's edge, where the skyline dissolved into mist and silence. For a while, neither spoke. It was strange, the comfort that existed in shared quiet, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. Elena traced the fog on her window with one finger, a nervous habit, something she used to do when she couldn't control her thoughts. "You still keep your promises?" she asked softly. Lorenzo exhaled through his nose, a half laugh, half sigh. "Depends which ones you're asking about. The one where you said we'd never run again?" His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Then I guess this isn't running." "No?" she asked. "What would you call it?" "Buying time." The answer was quiet, but it lingered. Buying time. As if that was all they'd ever been doing since the day they met. Living on borrowed moments, stolen between danger and desire. She turned slightly toward him, studying the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. They were steady now, but she remembered when they used to tremble after every night that ended in violence. He had always carried his sins like they were part of his heartbeat. "You could have sent someone else," she said. "A man like you doesn't chase ghosts himself." "You're not a ghost." "No?" He glanced at her then, a quick look, almost too fast to catch. "Not to me." The words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. Elena turned back to the window, but she could feel the warmth of them lingering in the air. The road stretched on. Long, dark, endless. Somewhere behind them, the city was waking up. Somewhere ahead, danger waited. And somewhere in between, two people who once swore they'd never cross paths again were sitting in the same silence, breathing the same air, pretending the past didn't still have its claws in them. The first light of morning began to break through the clouds, faint gold against the pale gray sky. It touched the side of Lorenzo's face, catching on the scar near his jaw, the one she'd seen him get and tried to forget. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "You look tired." "I am. When's the last time you slept?" "The night before you left," he said simply. The answer caught her off guard, so honest it almost hurt. She wanted to reply, to tell him not to say things like that, not when the world around them was still fragile. But she couldn't, because part of her still needed to hear it. He looked straight ahead, the road stretching infinite before them. "When we reach the coast, I'll make a call. There's someone who can help. Someone you trust? Someone who owes me." She let out a quiet breath, part relief, part disbelief. "That always sounds like trouble with you," he smiled faintly. "It usually is." The wind picked up outside, carrying the faint smell of salt and rain. The city was gone now, replaced by open fields and the sound of tires on wet pavement. For the first time in months, Elena felt something close to peace. Thin, temporary, but real. Maybe it was the distance, maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was just him beside her again. She didn't know where this road would end, but for now she didn't need to. By the time they reached the edge of the coast, the sky had shifted from black to pale blue, that quiet hour when the world feels too tired to wake but too restless to sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with salt and the faint scent of seaweed drifting inland. The ocean stretched far beyond sight, endless and calm, pretending not to notice the danger still following in their shadow. Lorenzo turned down a narrow road lined with pine trees, the kind that blocked the morning light. The tires crunched against gravel, each turn taking them deeper into a silence that felt both protective and suffocating. The safe house stood at the end, small, old, half forgotten, with weathered walls and shuttered windows that hadn't been opened in years. It wasn't much, but it was hidden, and for now that was enough. Inside, the air smelled of dust and wood smoke. The furniture was sparse, a single couch, a cracked mirror, a lamp that flickered when switched on. There were no photographs, no traces of life, just emptiness waiting to be borrowed by whoever needed it most. Elena walked through the small space, touching the edges of the walls as if to confirm they were real. The quiet felt different here, not the tense silence of running, but the kind that came after exhaustion. Her body moved slower now, every step a reminder of how much she had been holding in since the knock on her door. Lorenzo moved with that same stillness, the practiced calm of a man who had spent too long preparing for chaos. He checked the locks, the windows, the distance between every exit, every movement precise, every second measured. When he was done, he stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the road they came from, the one that led back to the city, to danger, to everything they'd tried to leave behind. There was no one there, just wind, just time, just silence. Elena found herself sitting on the couch, her hands clasped together, her eyes unfocused. The exhaustion ran deeper than her bones. It lived somewhere quieter, somewhere the heart hides its bruises. She realized how long it had been since she'd allowed herself to stop running, even for a minute. The stillness felt strange, almost foreign, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. The house creaked around them, settling into their presence. Outside, the waves hit the shore with slow rhythm, steady, patient, the sound of something eternal. It reminded her of nights when she used to fall asleep in safety, believing that morning always meant peace. That illusion had long since broken. But tonight, sitting in a place untouched by the world, she almost let herself believe again. Lorenzo didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence filled the room like a confession. Everything between them, the guilt, the anger, the love that refused to die, was already alive in the air. There was no need to disturb it with words. She watched him for a moment, the way he leaned against the wall, the exhaustion in his shoulders, the kind of quiet that didn't come from calm but from carrying too much for too long. And in that moment, she remembered something she had forgotten about him. That behind all the danger, behind all the stories that turned his name into fear, there was still a man who bled like anyone else. The sun began to rise, soft and slow, touching the edges of the curtains with faint gold. Morning light crept across the floorboards, tracing the dust, the walls, the space between them. For the first time since he appeared at her door, Elena felt the weight of everything settle, not gone, but paused. Like the universe had given them one small breath before the next storm arrived. The safe house wasn't safe. Not really, but for now it was still, and stillness was the closest thing they had to peace. The morning came softly, as if afraid to touch what the night had left behind. Pale light filtered through the dusty curtains, laying across the floor in broken stripes. The air inside the safe house was still, thick with silence, the kind that holds its breath before something changes. Elena woke first, her eyes open to the unfamiliar ceiling, the faint smell of rain still clinging to her clothes, and the echo of dreams she couldn't fully remember. For a moment she forgot where she was. The fear, the running, the 3 a.m. knock. All of it blurred into a strange calm. But then she turned her head, saw the empty chair by the window, and it all came back. Lorenzo was gone. Or maybe just outside. She didn't know. She sat up slowly, her body aching in quiet protest, and let her feet touch the cold floor. The boards creaked beneath her, a soft reminder that the world was still real, still waiting. The house was smaller than she'd realized the night before. Just a single hallway, a tiny kitchen, 2 doors that led to rooms untouched by time. Everything about it felt temporary, like a secret someone had tried to bury. She wandered, not out of curiosity, but out of restlessness, the kind that comes when your heart is too full to sit still. Her fingers traced the edges of the wallpaper, peeling in places, revealing older paint beneath. There was something comforting in the decay, something honest about things that didn't pretend to be perfect. In the corner of the second room, half hidden behind a stack of boxes, she found it, an old wooden desk. The kind built to outlive the people who owned it. The drawers were stiff, swollen with age, but one of them opened just enough to catch her attention. Inside, beneath a layer of dust, lay a photograph. It was old. The edges curled, the surface cracked in thin lines like veins. She lifted it carefully, brushing away the dirt with her thumb. The image was faded, almost ghostly. 2 people standing near a black car, the ocean behind them, sunlight spilling over their shoulders. It took her a second to recognize the face, Lorenzo, but younger, different. No tattoos, no scars, his eyes softer, untouched by the kind of darkness that would later claim him, and beside him, a woman. Her smile was quiet, her hair tied back, her hand resting gently on his arm. There was warmth in the way they stood together, familiarity, maybe even love. Elena felt her pulse shift, a slow tightening that reached her chest. She didn't know who the woman was. She didn't need to. What mattered was the way Lorenzo looked at her, like he used to look at Elena once. Back when life was still made of simple promises and late-night laughter, instead of secrets and escape routes. The photo trembled slightly in her hand, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from something else. Something heavier. She set it down on the desk, trying to steady her breathing. But the room had changed now. The air felt different, sharper, aware. It was as if the walls themselves knew what she'd found, what she wasn't supposed to see. For a long time, she just stood there, watching the photograph, listening to the faint sounds outside, the distant crash of waves, the rustle of wind through trees, the slow heartbeat of the world moving on without her. When Lorenzo returned later, he would notice the drawer moved. He would know she found it, and something between them, something fragile, unspoken, would break. Elena didn't take the photo. She left it exactly where it was, but the image stayed with her, burned behind her eyes like a secret that refused to fade. Because sometimes, the things you discover in silence don't need to be spoken to change everything. They just need to be seen. The air had changed by the time Lorenzo came back. You could feel it the moment the door opened, the soft drag of his footsteps, the quiet scrape of the lock sliding back into place. Morning light followed him in, painting long shadows across the floor. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, letting the silence wrap around him, heavy and careful. The kind of silence that tells you something's been moved, even when everything looks the same. Elena sat on the couch, still and unreadable. She didn't turn when he entered. Her hands were folded in her lap, too calm, too steady. That stillness, Mikey recognized it. It wasn't peace. It was control, the kind you build when you're holding back the truth. He walked past her, toward the small kitchen, placing his gun and jacket on the counter. His movements were measured, deliberate, like a man who'd lived his life hiding what he felt behind routine. But then his eyes caught the door of the second room, slightly open. The drawer, half pulled, the faint mark of dust wiped clean, and he knew. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just stood there for a moment, staring into the half-lit room where the photograph still waited, lying face up on the desk like an accusation. Elena's voice finally broke the quiet, low and calm. I wasn't looking for it. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even a defense. Just the truth. Small, soft, but sharp enough to draw blood. Lorenzo turned slightly, enough for her to see the change in his face. Not anger, not yet. But something deeper. Something almost like grief. He stepped closer to the doorway, then stopped. The sound of the ocean outside filled the space between them, steady and indifferent. She was part of my life before all of this, his voice said finally, rough and low, as if the words cost him more than he wanted to admit. Before everything turned to ash. Elena didn't move. She just listened. To his tone, not his words. He walked to the desk, picking up the photograph carefully, his thumb brushing over the woman's faded smile. His jaw tightened, barely visible, but enough. Then he put the photo back exactly where it had been, like it didn't matter, like it meant nothing, but his silence told another story. Elena's chest tightened, the ache of too many questions pressing against the space where trust used to live. She didn't ask who the woman was or what happened to her. She didn't have to. Some answers live in the way a man breathes, or refuses to. Lorenzo turned toward her, his eyes darker now. You shouldn't have gone through my things. Her gaze lifted to meet his, not defiant, not scared, just steady. I didn't. The house did. The words hung there, fragile, simple, and true. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm that had been waiting between them since that 3 a.m. knock was finally here, silent but devastating. He took a slow breath and looked away first. It wasn't surrender. It was something heavier, the weight of remembering too much. He walked past her again, heading for the door. We leave before nightfall. That was all he said. The door closed behind him, the echo stretching long and cold through the safe house. Elena stayed where she was, staring at the spot where the photograph used to lie. The sound of the waves reached her again. Calm, endless, cruel in its simplicity. She thought she'd seen the worst parts of him before. But now she understood something new. Something quieter, more dangerous. It wasn't his violence she feared anymore. It was his past. Because she could feel it. Still alive, still unfinished. And somewhere deep down, she knew it was coming for both of them. The sun was already falling when Lorenzo returned. The light through the safe house windows had turned golden, soft and fleeting. The kind of light that makes even old walls look like they're holding secrets. Dust floated lazily in the air, catching the glow, and for one strange moment, it felt almost peaceful. Almost. Elena had spent the entire afternoon in silence. She hadn't touched the photograph again, but its image stayed behind her eyes like a shadow that wouldn't move. She could feel it between every breath, a quiet reminder that love and lies often share the same heartbeat. When the door opened, she didn't look up right away. She just listened to the familiar rhythm of his footsteps, the low creak of his coat, the sound of something metallic being set on the table. Lorenzo's voice came low, rough, edged with fatigue. "We leave tonight. It wasn't a question. It was a decision. The kind that didn't wait for agreement." He moved through the room with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, checking the gun, the map, the keys. His movements were calm, but there was a quiet urgency beneath them, like he could feel time running out. Elena finally turned toward him, her eyes following the map he'd unfolded on the table. A coastline, a highway, a red mark somewhere far beyond the city. She didn't need to ask what it meant. Every line, every route was a promise and a warning, and escape wasn't freedom. It was survival. Lorenzo's hand traced the path across the map, his eyes scanning the distances. He spoke without looking at her. "There's a shipment route that runs south before dawn. We'll take it. No one will expect us there." His tone was all control. But his shoulders, they told a different story. The weight of it, the exhaustion, the fear he would never admit. Elena stood slowly, the quiet between them pressing heavier now. She watched him pack, the way his hands moved, quick, deliberate, steady, like a man building a plan out of thin air just to keep himself from falling apart. There were moments when she wanted to speak, to ask why he came back at all, why he couldn't just let her go, but every word she tried to form dissolved before reaching her lips, because somewhere deep inside she already knew the answer. He hadn't come back to hurt her. He'd come back to finish something. Outside, the wind began to rise. Branches scraped against the roof. The sound of waves hit harder against the cliffs. It felt like the world was warning them, a quiet voice whispering that safety was an illusion, that no plan could outrun fate forever. Lorenzo finally looked at her. For the first time since the photograph, his eyes met hers, steady, dark, and unreadable. "When we leave," he said softly, "don't look back." The words were simple, but they carried something heavier than command, something closer to goodbye. Elena didn't answer. She just nodded, slowly, her heart already echoing the ache behind his tone. He turned back to the table, folding the map, tucking away the gun, closing the distance between control and collapse with quiet, practiced grace. And for a moment, a single, fragile moment, she saw him not as the man the world feared, not even as the man she once loved, but as someone still fighting ghosts only he could see. When the sun finally disappeared, the safe house dimmed into silence. The last light slipped away from the walls, leaving only the sound of the sea and two people standing on the edge of something they couldn't name. The plan was ready. The night was waiting, and somewhere down that dark road, the past was waiting too. Patient, unforgiving, inevitable. The first few miles were silence. Only the hum of the engine and the whisper of the wind sliding across the windshield. The safe house shrank in the rearview mirror until it was nothing but a darker shadow against the sea. Lorenzo drove like a man who had memorized every curve of the road. His hands stayed loose on the wheel, but his eyes never rested. The highway ahead was empty, too empty, and the kind of darkness that sat on either side of them felt alive, like it was watching. Elena kept her gaze on the passing world, the blur of trees, the rare flicker of a gas station light. The air inside the car was tight with things unsaid. Every breath carried the weight of what they had left behind. She wanted to ask how far they'd go, where safety lived this time. But she didn't. The question itself felt dangerous, like saying it out loud might break the fragile rhythm keeping them moving. Somewhere behind them, headlights appeared, distant, steady, and wrong. They didn't belong to anyone ordinary. The glow cut through the dark, closing the space inch by inch. Lorenzo noticed first. His jaw tightened. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The car responded with a low growl, and the highway began to blur faster. The wind roared louder now. The night opened up ahead of them like a mouth ready to swallow. Elena felt her heartbeat sink with the speed. Faster, sharper, alive with fear. They took a turn that split the road into two thin veins of asphalt. Lorenzo didn't slow. The tires skidded slightly on the wet surface, a hiss of rubber against rain. Behind them, the headlights followed. 3 cars now, maybe 4. No sirens. Just silent pursuit. He didn't speak, but his mind was clear in the way his movements changed, decisions made in fractions of seconds. Every shift of gear, every cut through the road was calculation and instinct colliding. The road narrowed into forest. Branches scraped the car like fingers trying to hold them back. A single beam of moonlight broke through the canopy, flashing across his face, the hard line of focus, the small tremor of fatigue, the ghost of fear he refused to show. Elena gripped the seatbelt, her voice a whisper in her own head. Not again. Not this time. But the past had already caught up. The first gunshot cracked the silence. A single flash behind them, sharp and brief. The rear window splintered. Glass scattered across her lap like rain. Lorenzo didn't flinch. His eyes stayed forward. The car swerved, straightened, accelerated again. She could feel it now. The smell of gunpowder mixing with salt and rain, the thin tremor of adrenaline crawling up her spine. Somewhere in the chaos she looked at him, and for one suspended heartbeat, she saw something almost tender in the way he refused to look back. The road ahead split again. He took the left without warning. The tires lifted for half a breath before gripping the ground again. The headlights behind them staggered, breaking apart, one spinning out into darkness. The sound of metal against trees echoed and was gone, but 2 still followed. Minutes stretched like hours. The engine burned hot. The fuel gauge dipped lower. The chase wasn't about distance anymore. It was about endurance. Who could keep moving the longest before something broke? And then, through the blur of trees, the road opened. An old bridge stretching over black water. Half the railing gone. Half the structure forgotten. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He pushed harder. The car hit the bridge, wood and steel groaning beneath them. Behind, another engine screamed, a desperate echo. Halfway across, he slammed the brakes. The world lurched forward. The headlights behind them couldn't stop in time. Impact, metal against metal, sparks exploding like fireflies in the dark. Silence again, except for the sound of water, rising and cold. When the smoke cleared, Lorenzo's car was still on the bridge. The others were gone, lost to the river below. He didn't celebrate, didn't breathe relief. He just looked ahead, eyes distant, as if he already knew what this small victory would cost. Elena turned toward him, the faintest tremor in her voice that would never make it into words. She didn't need to speak. The moment already had its own language, one made of fear, survival, and the unspoken truth that every escape comes with a price. The engine coughed back to life. The bridge creaked beneath them. They moved forward again, into a horizon still too dark to promise anything, because the chase was over. But the hunt had just begun. They didn't make it far. A few miles past the bridge, the car began to cough, an uneven sound like something deep inside it was breaking. Smoke drifted from the hood, faint at first, then thick enough to turn the headlights into pale ghosts. Lorenzo slowed, steering toward the edge of the road where the trees leaned in close, hiding them from view. The engine shuddered once more before dying completely. The silence that followed was too sudden, too sharp. Elena sat still, her hands gripping the seatbelt. Her body was trembling, though she hadn't realized it until now. The adrenaline that had carried her through the chase was fading, leaving behind the raw ache of what they'd just survived. Lorenzo didn't speak. He opened the door, stepped out into the cold night air, and leaned against the car for a moment, breathing hard. The sky above was cloudless now, clear, cruel, endless. Somewhere far off, the sound of sirens whispered and died. He walked around to the front, lifted the hood, and cursed softly under his breath. The smell of burnt oil filled the air. The car wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight. Elena finally stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes, and the wind pushed her hair against her face. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that waits for something to happen. She moved closer to him, but something in his posture stopped her. His shoulders were stiff, his movements slower than they should have been. That's when she saw it. The dark stain spreading through the fabric of his sleeve. Blood. It wasn't much at first glance, but the deeper color near his wrist told the truth. The bullet hadn't missed completely. He noticed her gaze, tried to hide it, but she was already moving closer. Her voice broke through the night, low and steady, but filled with fear. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "It's nothing." But even in the dark, the lie was too obvious. He turned away, leaning against the car for balance. The blood kept seeping, dark and quiet. Every breath he took came shorter now. Elena reached for him anyway. She didn't think about what it meant or what she was risking. She just tore the scarf from around her neck and pressed it to the wound. His body tensed, a low sound escaping between his teeth, something between pain and restraint. "Hold still," she whispered. He did. For once, he let someone else take control. Her hands trembled as she tied the fabric tight. The warmth of his blood soaked through quickly. She could feel the pulse beneath her fingers, strong but uneven. The closeness between them was electric, charged with everything they hadn't said since that night he appeared at her door. The silence stretched. Only the wind moved through the trees. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her then, really looked. The kind of look that strips away every layer of pride and distance until all that's left is truth. "Because you'd stay." The words landed heavy, like a confession he hadn't meant to say. Elena froze. There was something in his tone, something more dangerous than the wound itself. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was longing. For a moment she forgot the road, the blood, the men chasing them. There was only him, this broken, relentless man who carried guilt like it was oxygen. Her hand lingered against his arm, her breath caught between them. But then the wind shifted again. A branch cracked somewhere deep in the forest. The world returned, reminding them both that peace was still a luxury they didn't own. He straightened, testing his arm. The pain was there, but he'd survive. He always did. Elena looked out into the dark road ahead, empty, uncertain, endless. The night had already taken too much from them, but in some strange way, it had also given something back, a moment of truth neither of them could unhear. They didn't speak after that. There was nothing left to say. Lorenzo moved toward the trees, his steps slow but steady. Elena followed, matching his pace, her heart still beating to the echo of his words. Because you'd stay, the wound would close. The scar would not. And somewhere in that space between pain and silence, something fragile began to live again. The forest grew darker the deeper they went. Each step sank into damp earth, every breath visible in the cold. The world had narrowed to the sound of their boots, the rhythm of two exhausted hearts moving through trees that looked the same in every direction. After an hour, Lorenzo stopped. His arm had stopped bleeding, but the color had drained from his face. He looked like a man stitched together by will alone. Then, through the fog, a faint shape emerged, a structure, low and leaning, half swallowed by ivy. The cabin. It stood at the edge of a clearing, a relic from a time when people built things to last. The door hung crooked on its hinges. The windows were covered in grime, but it had a roof, walls, and maybe a little warmth. That was enough. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and old wood. Dust floated like ghosts in the weak light of the flashlight. There was a small fireplace, a few broken chairs, a table with initials carved into its surface, a single bed in the corner, the mattress thin but clean. Elena moved quietly through the space, her eyes tracing every detail, every forgotten object. There was something strangely comforting about it all. The stillness, the simplicity, the sense that this place had been waiting for someone to remember it. Lorenzo dropped his bag near the wall and sank down beside it, breathing heavy. The wound had reopened a little, a dark stain visible beneath the bandage. Elena knelt beside him, her movements gentle, careful not to let her worry show too much. She cleaned the wound again with what little they had. Water from a bottle, a torn piece of fabric, quiet hands. He didn't resist. He just watched her, his eyes half shuttered, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. There was a strange peace in the silence that followed. The fire crackled softly as it came to life, throwing light across the room in uneven waves. The sound filled the emptiness between them. Elena sat on the floor beside the fire, her knees drawn close. Her reflection flickered in the glass of the window, tired eyes, pale skin, a woman who had lost everything except the will to keep moving. Across from her, Lorenzo's gaze was fixed on the flames. The firelight made him look younger, almost human again. For a moment she saw the man he used to be, the one who laughed once, who dreamed before violence became his language. It was strange, the things that lingered. The way his voice had softened when he said her name, the way her chest still tightened when he looked at her too long. Outside, the wind picked up. The cabin groaned as if the forest itself were reminding them they didn't belong here. But for now, the walls held. Elena's voice broke the quiet, soft and low. "Do you ever stop running?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the fire, his jaw tightening. When he finally spoke, his tone was barely above a whisper. "No, you just learn which way to run." The words sat heavy between them, real and unpolished. She nodded slowly, as if she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe they were both running from different versions of the same past. The firelight dimmed, shadows stretching long across the floor. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closing for a moment too long to be called rest. She watched him, this man who had brought chaos into her life and yet somehow felt like the only piece of it that made sense. Outside, the forest breathed. Somewhere far away, a branch snapped. The night pressed closer, listening. Elena reached over, pulling the blanket from her bag and laying it over him. His breathing slowed. The wound would need tending again by morning, but for now, sleep was mercy. She sat there for a long while, watching the fire fade into embers. The night whispered against the glass. Somewhere in that quiet, she let herself admit the truth she'd been running from since the moment he knocked on her door. That no matter how far she went, part of her had never wanted to be free of him. The cabin held its breath around them, and in that fragile silence, danger and tenderness became the same thing. The night outside was deep and endless, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Elena sat by the dying fire, its last embers breathing faint red light across the wooden floor. Lorenzo was awake again, though he hadn't moved. His eyes were open, fixed somewhere beyond the ceiling, lost in a place she couldn't reach. For a long while neither of them spoke. Then his voice came, low, rough, like gravel turning under slow tires. "You should have stayed away, Elena." The words weren't cruel, but tired. A man at war with his own choices. She didn't look at him right away. "You showed up at my door, Lorenzo. You made that choice." He let out a small, humorless breath. "Yeah, maybe that's my problem. I don't know how to let go of what I ruin." The fire cracked once, sending sparks into the dark. She turned to look at him then. Really look. The scars, the exhaustion, the edges of a man who had lived too long in violence. "You didn't ruin me," she said quietly. "You just reminded me how easy it is to forget who I was." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was something almost fragile in his eyes. "You think I don't know what I took from you?" Elena stayed still. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer. He sat up, slow, wincing from the pain in his shoulder. The firelight caught on his face, the same face she once traced with her fingertips when the world outside didn't matter. "That night," he said, "the one you walked out, I let you think it was about power, about control, but it wasn't. It was fear." Her breath caught. "Fear of what?" "Of losing something real. You were the first person who didn't want anything from me. Not money, not protection, not a name, just me. And I didn't know what to do with that." The confession hung between them, raw and human. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to tell him that sorry meant nothing when the blood had already been spilled, when the past couldn't be cleaned. But something in his voice, something cracked and unguarded, made her listen instead. "And the woman in the photograph?" she asked softly. He froze. The question landed like a blade. For a long time, the only sound was the wind outside, pressing against the cabin walls. Then he spoke, each word careful, deliberate. "Her name was Sophia." The name felt heavy in the air. "She was my sister." Elena blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "Your sister?" He nodded slowly. "When I was 17, she got caught in a deal that went wrong. I wasn't there to protect her. They used her to get to me. I found her too late." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, he looked less like a boss and more like a boy who had never forgiven himself. "That's why I built the life I did," he went on. "Not for power, not for control, for revenge. Every move I made was for her. And when I met you, you reminded me of her. The way you fought, the way you didn't give up." Elena felt something twist inside her, pity, sorrow, anger, all tangled into one impossible feeling. "So I was just another ghost to you?" "No," he said quickly. "You were the first thing that made me feel alive again." That scared me more than any gun ever could. The truth hit her harder than any lie ever did. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was admitting weakness, something he'd never done before. The fire finally gave out, leaving them in the blue darkness of the cabin. She could hear his breathing, uneven and quiet. Elena reached out then, her hand brushing his just barely. The contact was brief, but it was enough. "You can't keep carrying her, Lorenzo," she whispered. "You'll drown in ghosts." He turned his hand over, catching hers, holding it tight. "Then drown with me," he murmured. "At least I won't be alone." The wind howled outside. The fire was gone, but the warmth between their hands lingered. Elena didn't pull away. Not this time. The storm came without warning. No thunder at first. Just a low wind that twisted through the trees, bending the forest into whispers. Then came the rain, heavy, relentless, the kind that drowns out thought. By dawn, the world outside the cabin was a blur of gray and water. The roof leaked in slow drips that hit the wooden floor like a ticking clock. Time had turned into something fragile and uncertain. Elena stood by the window, watching the forest disappear behind the rain. Her reflection stared back at her, pale skin, tired eyes, a faint shadow beneath them. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Behind her, Lorenzo stirred. He'd slept for only a few hours, his body refusing to rest fully. The wound had stopped bleeding, but the fever was creeping in. "How bad is it?" she asked without turning. "I've had worse," he said, though his voice was hoarse. She finally faced him, crossing the small space to kneel by his side. His skin was too warm, his pulse too fast. She pressed her hand against his forehead, her jaw tightening. "You're burning up." He managed a weak smirk. "Guess I'm finally hot enough for you." She gave him a look, half worried, half frustrated, but didn't answer. She tore another strip from her shirt and dipped it in cold water, pressing it against his neck. Outside, lightning tore through the sky, lighting up the cabin for a split second, bright enough to reveal something in the distance. A shadow moved beyond the tree line. Elena froze. Her breath caught. She waited, counting the seconds between the flashes. Another burst of light. Another glimpse. There. Movement. She turned sharply to Lorenzo. "Someone's out there." He sat up too fast, his face twisting in pain, but his instincts kicked in. He grabbed the gun from the bag beside him and moved toward the window, peering through the rain. "How many?" "I don't know. I saw one. Maybe more." He cursed under his breath, the calm slipping from his voice. "They found us." The words were a gunshot in the quiet. He checked the magazine, his hand steady even as his body shook. She watched him. This man she both feared and loved, preparing for war while barely able to stand. "You can't fight like this," she said. "I don't have a choice." "Then neither do I." Her tone was firm, the kind that left no room for argument. He looked at her for a moment, rain streaking down the window, thunder rolling above them, and something in his expression softened. "You shouldn't have to be part of this." Too late for should. He almost smiled at that. Almost. The storm raged louder now. Wind slammed against the cabin walls. The door rattled. Every instinct in Elena's body screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Another flash of lightning. This time she saw them clearly. 3 figures moving between the trees, black coats blending into the storm. 3, she whispered. "Maybe 4. Lorenzo nodded, eyes hardening. "They're not here to talk." The words barely left his mouth before the first gunshot ripped through the air, shattering the window beside them. Glass exploded into the room. She screamed, ducking down. He pulled her behind the wall, covering her with his body. Rain poured through the broken frame, the smell of wet earth and gunpowder filling the room. "Stay down," he said, voice sharp. "Lorenzo! Stay down!" He fired once, twice, precise, measured shots that echoed through the storm. One figure fell, the others scattered. Elena pressed her back against the wall, shaking, her heart racing so fast it hurt. She could hear them shouting outside, their footsteps crunching closer through the mud. "They're surrounding us," she said, voice trembling. He reloaded, breathing hard. "Then we don't let them get close." Another shot. Another scream. Then silence, broken only by the pounding rain. Elena risked a glance through the shattered window. The clearing was empty now, just the forest, dripping and dark. "Are they gone?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He stepped back, the gun still raised. Then his knees buckled. The fever, the blood loss, it was all catching up. "Lorenzo!" She caught him before he hit the floor. His head fell against her shoulder, his skin burning hot. Don't close your eyes," she said, shaking him. His voice came soft, distant. "You're safe. That's all that matters." "No," she whispered fiercely. "Not without you." The storm outside screamed louder than ever, like the world itself was splitting open. She held him close, her hands stained with blood, her tears mixing with the rain that slipped through the roof. In that moment, surrounded by thunder and chaos, she realized the truth. The danger wasn't just outside the cabin. It had been inside her all along. The storm began to die just before dawn. The rain slowed to a whisper, and the thunder rolled away into the distance, leaving behind a silence that felt almost cruel. Inside the cabin, smoke lingered in the air, a mix of gunpowder and damp wood. The fire was long dead. The floor was streaked with mud, blood, and the broken glass of a night that had gone too far. Elena sat on the floor, her back against the wall, Lorenzo's head resting against her lap. His skin was pale now, the fever still burning but weaker, like a flame losing air. She kept one hand on his chest, counting each breath like a prayer. "You're still here," she whispered. "You're still breathing." It wasn't a statement. It was a promise she was making to herself. The light creeping through the cracked window was cold, gray, and unforgiving. It revealed the cost of what they had survived. The splintered wood, the bullet holes, the emptiness. But also, somehow, the proof that they were still alive. Lorenzo stirred, his voice raw. "They're gone?" "For now," she said softly. "You scared them off." He gave a weak smile that barely reached his eyes. "That's a first. Scaring people while half dead." She didn't laugh. She couldn't. "You need help, Lorenzo. Real help. A doctor. No hospitals." His tone was flat, final. "Then you'll die here." "Maybe I already did." The words hit her harder than the storm had. She turned his face toward her, forcing him to look at her. "Don't say that. Don't even think it. You're not done yet." He looked at her for a long time, eyes clouded but searching. "Why are you still here, Elena?" The question was quiet but sharp. "You had every chance to leave. You could have run while I was bleeding on that floor. So why didn't you?" She swallowed hard. There was no easy answer. No perfect truth. Just the one that had been growing inside her since the night he knocked on her door. "Because I couldn't," she said finally. "Because even after everything, the danger, the lies, you're the only person who ever made me feel seen. And I don't know what that says about me, but I'm done pretending I don't care." He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as a woman who'd walked away from him once, but as the only one who'd ever walked back. "You shouldn't care," he said quietly. "People like me, we drag everything we touch into the dark. Then let me be the light." "Lorenzo." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Simple, bare, real. He closed his eyes, something breaking inside him. Not pain, not regret, but surrender. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "If I let you stay, I can't protect you from what's coming." "You don't have to protect me," she said. "Just stop pushing me away." Silence followed. Deep, fragile, full of everything they couldn't say. Elena pressed the back of her hand to his forehead again. The fever had eased just a little, enough to make her believe he might actually survive the morning. Outside, the forest began to wake. Birds called out cautiously between dripping branches. The world smelled of rain and earth, clean again for now. She stood, her legs stiff, and stepped outside for the first time since the storm began. The ground was soaked. The bodies of 2 men lay in the mud near the tree line, half hidden by fog. She turned away quickly, her stomach tightening. When she stepped back inside, Lorenzo was watching her. "You saw them?" he asked. She nodded. "They won't be coming back." "They will," he said simply. "Not those men, but others. There's always another." She sat down beside him again, leaning her head against the wall. "Then we'll be ready." He looked at her with a mix of disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. "You sound like you plan to stay." "I do." The light through the window brightened slightly, touching the side of his face. For a moment, he didn't look like the man she'd feared, or the one the world whispered about. He just looked tired, human. Elena reached out, brushing her thumb against the scar on his jaw. the one she'd once kissed, the one that had always made him flinch. This time he didn't. "Rest," she whispered. "We'll figure out the rest when you wake." He didn't argue. His eyes closed slowly, the tension finally slipping from his body. Outside, the world was quiet again, but deep in the forest, somewhere unseen, a car engine started, and the peace they'd built inside that broken cabin began to crumble before it ever had a chance to last. The morning came slow and heavy, like the world itself didn't want to wake. Mist curled around the trees outside, soft and ghostly, swallowing the road in every direction. The rain had stopped, but everything still dripped. The roof, the branches, the quiet. Elena sat at the table near the window, staring at a map spread open beneath her hands. Her hair was damp, her clothes still carrying the scent of smoke. She'd barely slept. Every sound, every creak, every bird call set her nerves on edge. Lorenzo was still asleep on the bed, his breathing shallow but steady. The fever had broken sometime before dawn, but the color hadn't returned to his face. He looked peaceful in a way that scared her, too still, too calm. She needed to find help, food, gas, anything, but something inside her whispered that leaving him alone, even for an hour, wasn't an option. Then she heard it, a faint crack of a branch outside, too heavy to be an animal, too close to be an accident. Elena froze. Slowly she stood and reached for the gun Lorenzo had left on the table. Her hands trembled as she checked the safety, just like he'd shown her. She crept to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. At first she saw nothing, just fog and trees. Then a figure appeared, walking toward the cabin with careful, deliberate steps. Her breath caught. It wasn't a stranger. It was Marco Lorenzo's oldest friend, the one who had once smiled at her across the table, who'd promised he'd always keep Lorenzo safe. He was supposed to be dead. Her chest tightened. She stepped back from the window, the gun still in her hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. Lorenzo, wake up!" He stirred, blinking against the dim light. "What's wrong?" "Someone's here." He sat up instantly, the exhaustion vanishing beneath instinct. "Who?" "Marco." The name alone changed the air. Lorenzo froze, eyes sharp, expression hardening. "That's not possible." "It's him. I saw his face." He swung his legs off the bed, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. "Elena, listen to me. You stay behind me no matter what happens." "Lorenzo, no matter what." Before she could answer, a soft knock echoed through the cabin. 3 short raps, familiar, the kind that used to signal trust, back when loyalty still meant something. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. He motioned for her to stay back, then opened the door slowly. Marco stood on the porch, rain still dripping from his coat. His face looked the same. Strong, calm, with that practiced charm that made people believe him before he ever spoke. "You look like hell, brother," Marco said quietly. "You shouldn't be here," Lorenzo replied. His voice was steady, but every muscle in his body was coiled tight. "I could say the same to you. Word is, half the city thinks you're dead." "Maybe I should have stayed that way." Marco's eyes flicked past him, to Elena, standing in the shadow by the table. For just a moment, something dark passed over his face, a glimmer of guilt, or maybe recognition. "You brought her here?" Marco asked. "She's with me," Lorenzo said sharply. "You know that's not what I mean," Lorenzo's patience snapped. "Say what you came to say." Marco sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You were supposed to get out clean. I made sure of it. But someone talked, Lorenzo. Someone who knew where you'd run." Elena's heart dropped. She didn't move, didn't breathe. "Who?" Lorenzo asked, his tone dangerous now. Marco hesitated. "It doesn't matter. They know about the safe house, about the cabin, about her." The room went still. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "You're lying, am I?" Marco stepped closer. "Ask yourself, how do you think I found you?" The silence was sharp enough to cut. Lorenzo's hand tightened around the gun at his side. "You sold me out." "I didn't have a choice," Marco snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "They came for me, Lorenzo. They would have killed me if I didn't talk. So you gave them her name?" Elena felt her stomach twist. The man who had once been a friend, who had shared drinks, jokes, and promises, had led death straight to their door. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Marco said. "I just needed time." Lorenzo's voice was ice. "You took my time. You took her safety. You don't get to stand here and talk about what you meant." For a moment, no one moved. The wind outside pushed against the cabin walls, the only sound left between them. Then Marco lowered his gaze. "They're still coming, Lorenzo. You've got maybe an hour before they find you again. Then you'd better start running." Marco looked up, and for the first time, there was something almost human in his expression. Regret, maybe even shame. He took one step back, then another before disappearing into the fog. Lorenzo closed the door slowly, his face unreadable. Elena stood frozen by the table, her pulse still hammering. "Lorenzo!" He didn't look at her. "Pack your things. We're leaving. Where will we go? Somewhere no one remembers my name." She wanted to believe that place existed, but as she looked at him, at the weight in his eyes, she knew the truth. Some sins don't stay buried. And some betrayals never stop echoing. The fog never lifted. It stayed thick and silver, draping over the trees like a shroud. The road out of the forest was half hidden, a narrow, broken trail that seemed to vanish into nothing. Elena walked beside Lorenzo as he moved carefully, one arm pressed against his side. He was weaker now, every step slower, every breath heavier, but he didn't complain. The only sound was their boots sinking into wet earth and the faint rustle of leaves above them. They had been walking for hours. No words, no plan. Just the quiet understanding that this was the end of something. When the path curved, they reached a clearing, a stretch of open ground overlooking the valley below. The city was miles away, a faint smear of light through the mist. Lorenzo stopped first. He stood still, breathing hard, then turned to look at her. "You should keep going from here," he said softly. "There's an old service road a few miles down. You'll find a car. Keys under the visor." Elena frowned, confusion cutting through exhaustion. "What do you mean, you? You're coming too." He shook his head once. Slow, final. "No. Lorenzo, don't." "Elena." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. "They'll keep coming for me. For as long as I'm breathing. If you stay, they'll come for you too." "Then let them," she said, her voice breaking. "We'll run again." "We always do." He smiled faintly, that same tired half-smile she'd fallen for before she even knew why. "You don't run from ghosts, sweetheart. You just stop letting them follow you." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and pine. His coat flapped softly against his legs. She took a step closer, her hand trembling as she reached for him. "You think I can just walk away? You have to. After everything? After what we've done, what we've survived." He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had that first night in the cafe, when the world was still something they believed they could change. "You were the only thing I ever did right," he said. "If you walk away now, I get to keep that." Tears blurred her vision. She shook her head, angry and desperate. "No, don't do this to me. Don't make this choice for both of us." "I already did, the night I came to your door." His tone cracked on the last word, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She saw the fear beneath it, not of dying, but of losing her again. "Please," she whispered, "just stay with me." He reached up and touched her face, his hand warm against her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear that fell before she could stop it. "You made me remember what it feels like to be human," he said. "That's more than anyone ever gave me." She caught his hand and held it against her skin. "Then don't stop being that man now. If I stay, I'll destroy everything I love. And if you leave, you'll destroy me." The silence that followed was unbearable. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind had gone still. Lorenzo leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. His voice was barely a whisper. "Then hate me for this." And he kissed her. Slow, deep, full of everything they never said. It wasn't goodbye. It was every memory condensed into one impossible moment. When he pulled away, she was shaking. "Don't," she said. "Please don't." But he'd already stepped back. His gun was holstered, his eyes steady again. The boss returning, the man fading away. "Go east," he said quietly. "Keep moving until you hit the highway. Don't look back." "Lorenzo, if you love me," he said, "don't come back." Her breath caught, the words sinking in like a blade. She wanted to scream, to throw herself into his arms, to refuse the ending he'd chosen. But something in his gaze stopped her. Not coldness, not command, but peace. She turned slowly, her steps unsteady at first. Every part of her wanted to turn around, to see him one more time, to promise that love was enough, but she didn't. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally understood. Some goodbyes aren't punishment, they're protection. She kept walking until the fog swallowed her. The forest closed behind her like a door. Lorenzo watched her go, his figure framed against the pale light of morning. Then he turned back toward the valley, toward the sound of distant engines climbing the mountain road. He exhaled once, slow and steady. Let's finish this. And when the first shot echoed through the trees, the world seemed to pause, as if time itself bowed its head for the man who had loved too much and too late. She thought the Mafia boss would forget her until he showed up at 3 a.m. If you felt that heartbeat too, hit subscribe, because the night's not over yet.